Hey guys, Jay here. So for the longest time, I've been a firm believer that a recording quality, how it's recorded, is far more important than the file format of the audio. However, after that, given that it is recorded very well and all that kind of stuff, after that, file format can matter. For example, if you gave me an option of having a DSD 512 format for a recording that I really like versus an MP3 version, of course, I would prefer to play the DSD file. However, the biggest problem with DSD that I found was that, well, its availability. Usually the media format is required a large kind of capacity, and also the fact that, there's not much music recorded in DSD, and, it's kind of, as some people might say, a dying format. And that's truly unfortunate as an audiophile because DSD does have a lot to offer in terms of fidelity. But I've come across a few DACs like the Meitner MA3i that upsamples everything that's coming in stream to DSD 1024. And if you watch the video for that, I really love that DAC. But another DAC that has a similar capability came into my home, and that is the PMG 512 DAC from PS Audio. And although this one doesn't upsample to 1024 like the Meitner MA3i, it upsamples to 512. And so that's 512 times the sampling rate of a standard CD. And arguably, this DAC is the best DAC that PS Audio has ever designed. And PMG actually stands for Paul McGowan, who is the founder of PS Audio. And this is no small update by PS Audio. This is actually a whole redesign of their flagship series. And you can tell that they were not messing around. For one thing, the entire chassis design for this series is the best I have seen from PS Audio, and I think a lot of you guys would agree with me on that one. It does look quite nice. And the build quality is absolutely phenomenal, not just on the outside, but on the inside as well. When you open up the DAC, there's a shielding cage around the entire circuit, and on the front fascia, the aluminum is very chunky. This DAC, even though it looks pretty plain, is quite heavy. On the back, you get a plethora of digital inputs, including the two I2S because it's PS Audio, and both RCA and XLR analog outputs, but no digital outputs, meaning you cannot use this unit just as a streamer with a different DAC. And I wouldn't know why you would want to, since the focus of this unit is really the DAC. Don't get me wrong, the streaming function is very, very much intuitive and quite easy to use. You can use AirPlay, UPnP, Rune, and all that kind of stuff, and I mostly use Tidal Connect and so on. So just like a normal streamer, it doesn't have all the bells and whistles, but in terms of connectivity and easy use cases, yeah, it supports Spotify, Tidal, Rune and UPnP and all that kind of stuff. But the focus is on the DAC. And 1-bit DACs are considered DSD DACs, and they're very simple. So compared to R2R DACs or other kind of Saber DAC chips or AKM DAC chips, multi-bit DAC chips, 1-bit DACs, DSD DACs are meant to be simple. So it is the simplest form as a DAC. And this is because it requires less components compared to other DACs. As you can see here, there's only 3 major steps. Firstly, we have the 512 DSD engine, which upsamples everything including PCM to DSD 512. It then hands it off to the FPGA, which then cleans up the signal and does whatever is programmed to do to make the signal optimal and low noise. Then finally, we have the analog filter that is meant to filter out the noise. And if you go into the menu, you can actually change the DSD sampling rate to be lower. But personally, I tried it and I like the 512 the best. And I don't know why you would want a lower DSD resolution when you have 512. So I stuck with the 512. But as music lovers and nerds for this kind of stuff, there's 2 things that we must ask. One, what is the true benefit of DSD? Is it worth it? And second, is oversampling the solution? Is oversampling something bad or good for the overall fidelity of the music that we hear? Is it musical? And so those 2 things are what I delved into. So let's tackle the first one. Is DSD beneficial? Now, to actually tackle this, to be honest, the difference between PCM and DSD will require an entire video dedicated to it, so I'll do that later. But very simply, yes, there is benefit to DSD. First thing, DSD DACs inherently have lower noise floor. And second, it is better at handling those noise. So because it has such a wide bandwidth, and because it can push the noise up to the higher frequencies, you can simply add an analog low-pass filter like the PS Audio DAC here and kind of shave off the noise. And so this is what is called noise shaping. And this is also what the Meitner MA3i does as well. And of course, how steep that filter is and all that kind of stuff matters. However, we're not gonna go that deep in this video. And also where that noise is in a PCM multi-bit DAC versus a DSD DAC is different. With PCM, the overall noise is spread out across the frequencies of hearing bandwidth. Whereas with DSD, that noise is inherently pushed to the higher frequencies because it has that bandwidth, which again ties into the inherent benefit of DSD having less noise floor. Second, a properly designed DSD DAC can potentially be the closest thing to an analog signal because it's not a coded form but a density form where multi-bit is not required to represent the amplitude through a binary code like PCM, but rather a single 1-bit, and the density of the pulses is what determines the amplitude. More pulses would mean higher amplitude and lower pulses would mean lower amplitude. So in my journey and experience of 1-bit DACs in general, with whether it be the Meitner or the PMG DAC here, I personally found that there is an advantage and there's not much to dislike about being able to upsample everything that you play to DSD because it's better for noise, it's better for noise shaping, it is also just a higher fidelity, more involving, more musical kind of experience that I personally found with these types of DACs. So given these advantages, it seems very impressive that anything that you play into these DACs will be upsampled to DSD 512 in case of the PMG DAC and all the way up to 1024 for the MA3i. However, this is upsampling and not a native playback. And for the longest time, I have not been a fan of oversampling because I'm a firm believer that anytime you oversample or downsample, any type of conversion that happens, there's bound to be loss or artifacts that can occur. But I have to admit, after living with these DACs, the Meitner and the PMG, I found that the internal upsampling engines on these units have gotten so good that I really don't mind it. And I think the pros outweigh the cons in terms of upsampling, being able to upsample every music that you like, that you play onto this unit to be upsampled to the high resolution of DSD. I think that's just really cool. Because let's face it, in a perfect world, yes, I would like to have all my music that I love recorded, re-recorded, remastered into DSD formats natively. However, that is unlikely to happen and very, very unrealistic in my opinion. So the next obvious solution would be for these DACs, 1-bit DACs, to have an internal oversampling engine that oversamples anything that you play to DSD, while making sure that the circuit takes advantage of DSD while reducing the negative artifacts and unwanted things when it comes to oversampling. And I think PS Audio has done an amazing job because the sonic quality I hear through this upsampling DAC is just phenomenal. You know, just a few years ago, I would have said, well, I'm not a fan of oversampling, you know, I don't want it. But now, I think this makes a lot of sense because whether I play poorly recorded music or really well recorded music, the musicality enhancement is quite real. First thing that I noticed with these DACs, both the Meitner and the PMG, is how more airy it sounds. My system just seemed to open up in soundstage and this spacious presentation. Now, I did face this kind of experience when I used a 1-bit DSD DAC way back, and my impression wasn't very good because I found that while it sounded more airy, it felt more thin sounding. And I heard artifacts and things that I really didn't feel like it made it more musical sounding. However, that's all different now. With advancements on these internal oversampling engines, it just seems that things are way better than it used to be with oversampling. I don't get any of those artifacts or lack of bass or lack of meat to the bone like I used to when I used oversampling DACs. Now, all I get is that beneficial open airy sound up top while retaining that meaty character that PS Audio is known for. I personally found the overall sound of this DAC to be neutral, with a more of a warmer character in comparison to only something like the EMM Labs MA3i. And maybe because the MA3i upsamples all the way to 1024, which is 1024 times the CD's sampling rate, maybe it's because of that, but I find it more airy and spacious sounding than the PMG DAC. But the PMG DAC is no slouch either. It still sounds very spacious up top. And what I really like about the PMG DAC opposed to the MA3i is the more meaty textures in the mid-range and the bottom end, which is what PMG or PS Audio house signature is known for. It still retains that more of that kind of textured and more bombastic bass, which again, I love that they retain that because that's what PS Audio is known for, is that more kind of analog bass sound, right? More kind of rupturous sound. But here, you seem to get a little bit more extension and more effortlessness in the bass as well, again, because perhaps of the higher bandwidth. And if you're familiar with the house sound of PS Audio, then you don't even need to hear the full sound description of this video, because really what this DAC sounds like is a house sound of PS Audio that you are very familiar with, but with a more kind of effortless bass and a more spacious up top airy presentation. And really the deciding factor for me into perhaps considering a 1-bit DAC in my system in the future is the fact that even though there's upsampling going on, my poor recordings that I play, the music that I enjoy but wasn't recorded very well, does not suffer as it did before when I oversampled. I can just remember like few years back when I oversampled these horrible recordings, but yet the music that I love, well, it didn't turn out very well. It sounded thin, I could hear more artifacts, and it made it overall less enjoyable musically speaking, and that's why I said recording quality matters more than the file resolution. The file resolution can be as high as you want it to be. However, if the recording is not good, then what's the point? But somehow, with these 1-bit DACs, I found that even when you oversample poor recordings, it doesn't make it detrimental to the listening experience. In fact, I would say it actually adds space and removes some of the noise that I was hearing in the background that makes it a more enjoyable and a high fidelity experience than if I were to play those recordings as is, through let's say a R2R DAC like the Denafrips. And even for low volume listening, I was quite surprised that these 1-bit DACs did a better job at handling that more effortless bass and that more airy presentation and retaining that even at low volumes compared to multi-bit DACs or even R2R DACs that I love very much. Now, particularly with the PMG DAC, you do get a nice touchscreen in the front to adjust the settings, but also adjust the volume. Now, I have to say, adjusting the volume is a little bit weird. It jumps sometimes and doesn't work properly sometimes, and maybe that can be corrected with the firmware update because, again, one of the advantages of a DAC with PS Audio is that you get firmware updates regularly, which can improve the functionality and the sound quality of the DAC because of the FPGA coding. But you do get a remote, and that's what I recommend to control the volume, is that you do get a very nice remote with PS Audio. And what I really like about PS Audio remotes, and I think all remotes should do this, is when you press this little button here, it lights up. So you can see it very clearly even in the dark, which I absolutely love because I listen to it in the dark all the time. So this is a very useful functionality for me. And of course, all the other buttons are very intuitive and very easy to use. So I do love PS Audio remotes. So I really love this DAC, and there's not much I can fault about the overall sound of the DAC because the sound is exactly how I like it. Overall neutral with a very airy presentation. One of the most airy presentation outside of the MA3i DAC from Ed Meitner. Honestly, it is a very good sounding DAC. The only downside that I can see is the price. Priced at $8,500, which is not very attainable for a lot of people out there. However, considering that their previous direct stream DAC, flagship DAC, was $8,000, it's only a $500 increase in terms of their flagship series, which has been basically, like I said, totally redesigned. So the current owners of the PS Audio direct stream might not feel like it's a huge jump considering it's only $500 difference, but I did hope that something like this that upsamples everything that's coming in to DSD 512 and make it sound more airy and more effortless in the bass, I hoped that that would come at a lesser price, more accessible for a lot of people to experience. And on top of that, I know that 1-bit DACs are supposed to be simple, but seeing the internals kind of empty which was also the reservation I had with the MA3i DAC, gives me an impression of this like less value for money. Like I'm getting less stuff for the money. Like I'm not getting chunky Jupiter capacitors and all these exotic components like you would on an R2R DAC or other exotic DACs. So it feels like you're getting less. But I've come to understand that you're getting something that is truly unique compared to those other DACs with these DSD upsampling engines. Because again, if you are someone that loves to play DSD, well, the problem is that not a lot of music is recorded in native DSD, and your music choice is limited because of that. Whereas now, you can play anything, any music that you like through the stack, and it will be upsampled all the way to DSD 512. And this is kind of like a side story, but I remember like way back when my friend had an upsampling device that he has developed that costed like an exorbitant amount of money, like something like 15 grand or something like that he used to upsample files to make sure that it is as good as it can using that upsampling engine that he has designed. And so oversampling, engines itself, the oversamplers itself was quite expensive, a few years back. So considering that, having a very capable internal upsampling engine inside your DAC is something that I didn't quite imagine to happen, not this fast. So I'm quite happy with the sound that the PMG DAC provides here, and I think it is a, very, very great DAC. Again, the only thing is, you have to be pretty wealthy to be able to afford something like this. And the question you have to ask yourself is, do you care about DSD? My personal current answer is, yeah. Personally, I think if the oversampling engines do such a great job like this, I think this may be a better solution than, again, the less realistic goal of making everything else DSD from PCM. I think internal upsampling is the way to go, and perhaps the future of audiophiles that want to play DSD. So yeah, it's a weird place. It's a weird workaround, but I did think that if I had the music that I like and had the choice to be upsampled very nicely with, great engines to DSD, why not? And if it sounds better, of course, I'm in for it. And so that was my experience with the PMG DAC. I think it's a great DAC, and I only can see it getting better in the future. And perhaps for the rest of us at a lower price point. But that's pretty much it from me. I hope this video was helpful and entertaining, and I'll see you guys on my next journey, next video. Make sure to subscribe and click that like button on this video, and I'll see you guys on my next one. Until next time.